This is one of a series of short videos on the topics dealing with estate planning. This morning we're going to discuss the fourth law of thermodynamics, which is Murphy's Law. Murphy's Law simply states that if something can go wrong, it will go wrong. And in particular, this morning we are focusing on the topic of children. Now, children have rights to inherit from you when you die. And this is determined by your state law. It's called the Statute of Descent and Distribution in most states. And the children are given a chunk of the estate, and this is a decision that you haven't made. Your legislature has already done this for you. If you create a will, you can disinherit your children, but there are certain things you need to know if you mention children in your will. Now, the reason I mention Murphy's Law is if you don't list all of your children in your will, then the child can contest what you have done and claim that as a pretermitted heir, and that is someone who should be an heir of the estate, but you simply left them out of you didn't mention them in your will. They can come in and demand that they receive their statutory share of your estate. Now, who are we talking about when we're talking about children? Of course, we're talking about biological, natural children. We're talking about adopted children. We're talking about children born out of wedlock. And this is a touchy subject because several clients of mine have told me they have children born out of wedlock. They don't want to mention them in their will. What should they do? Well, this is not a foolproof answer or solution, but they can certainly put a sentence in the will that says, I intentionally make no provision for no person who's not named in this will. Now, this topic and other topics are discussed in the book Your Will's Companion. It's also discussed in the iPad app Will Crafter. But getting back to the topic of children, if you have children born out of wedlock and you don't want to mention them in your will, put the situation in perspective. The famous musical The King and I was based on the life of a king who lived in Siam during the Victorian era. And although he had 27 years of celibacy because he was a Buddhist monk, once he was elevated to king, he married 32 times and he had 82 children. He also had some concubines, and presumably their children that were listed there. Now, he'd need an Excel spreadsheet, I think, to keep track of all of his kids. So if you have children born out of wedlock, just put your situation in perspective and consider yourself fortunate that you don't live in Victorian times. The reason I'm mentioning these topics is the fourth law of thermodynamics, Murphy's Law, could simply be stated, who can kick the slats out from under your estate plan? Your kids can if you don't mention them in your will. So put them in your will.